we are the ultimate givers. We're also the ultimate receivers, but our bodies are very giving and very receiving, and they shift and change in order to the biological demands placed on them in the environment. I'm Heather Grzych, and this is the Wisdom of the Body podcast. This podcast explores the idea of body intelligence as the real key to learning the knowledge of life, or what we call Ayurveda in the ancient language of Sanskrit. We do that by connecting with today's creative leaders and experts who will help you listen to your body, trust your gut, and live in deeper harmony with nature. Come join me as we unlock the golden door to clear, direct perception and become very deep listeners. You can find the Wisdom of the Body podcast on Apple, Spotify, and Stitcher. You can also follow us by joining my email at heathergrish.com or on Instagram at heathergrish. I know you're going to love this podcast, so take a second right now to subscribe. Today, I want to talk about the stages of a woman's life, from the moment that we're born and growing up as a baby into a child, all the way to this later stage of life where we're old and witchy, hopefully really old and really witchy, and all of what happens in between. So as our life changes, as we are on the planet longer, there are different stages that our bodies are going to go through. And in concert with that, different stages our mind is going to go through, our emotional experience in these different stages. So starting with childhood, many of us don't even really remember a lot from childhood. We are very young, juicy, watery bodies. There's a lot of growth happening in this phase. So if you think about this first phase being the left side of a pyramid, going up a pyramid in some way, this growth rate is just insane from the moment that there's a little zygote that comes together inside a woman's body to a baby being born and all the things that a child has to grow and develop and learn in those years. And the bodies at that time, they're very, you look at pictures of cherubs from different periods of art, and there's a juiciness that comes with this childhood. And for anybody who is around little children, you just want to hug them. They're like delicious little huggy things. And we were all like that as well when we were little. And some of that has to do with the fact that there's just so much water in our bodies. And as we know in Ayurveda, water is correlated with love and attachment. And so when we see these lovely little children, we want to hug them. They're just so full of this juicy love. And they have to be in order to withstand the amount of transition and growth that's happening to them in that period of time. Once we get to be, the puberty stage, when girls start turning into terrors for their parents, the elements change. So when we are babies, we have a lot of the water element and the earth element. And when we're children, we have a lot of water element and earth element. But then once we hit puberty, that fire element comes in. And as that fire element comes in, and it keeps growing up in those middle age years. So as puberty hits, there's a transition period from being the baby to being the mature adult being. And this is the transition period. And it's a lot of intensity, and it's definitely related to the fire element. And even just this idea of when you hear that in animals and heat, that idea of there being fire, and that's when a girl gets her period and starts getting pubic hair and all those lovely things, and the emotional roller coasters that start to come because of that fire element, and the intensity of the emotions really starts to change at that time. So puberty is that next phase. So from childhood to puberty and moving into adulthood. And, we have young adulthood and we have middle age. There's different phases even within adulthood. But the idea between adulthood is kind of the top of the pyramid. And there's an equilibrium in adulthood between the idea of growth and breaking down. It's the maintenance phase of a body. So whereas the beginning years are all about growth and the puberty years are all about transformation, and then once the middle ages come, that's really about the maintenance of the body. I'm not talking about your career or anything else like that. It's really just about the physiology of the body. And so, in this phase of your cells are being regenerated all the time. So you have cells that are dying and other cells that are being created. And that equilibrium point keeps you. So that sort of equal rate of growing and breaking down. And there are times in this phase of life, there are times within the month where the rate of growth and breaking down changes and shifts in a woman's body in response to, hormonal fluctuations, just the natural occurrence of things happening in the body due to the menstrual cycle. So menstrual cycle comes in puberty and the body starts to practice aligning itself, its fire element with the moon, with that water element, and that alignment is constantly trying to balance itself in relation to the environment that a woman is in. So, and then also the different transitions that can happen if she ends up having children, the different rates of growth and breaking down, and different parts of the body that will grow and break down in that period. And it's quite amazing. The reason that women are just so fascinating is that our bodies will change, and we're like shapeshifters. Our bodies will just change in response to the demands placed on them. Just the idea that you could grow a baby, the baby's born, the body changes, the breasts grow, the baby puts the lips to the nipple, the milk comes. I mean, we are the ultimate givers. We're also the ultimate receivers, but our bodies are very giving and very receiving, and they shift and change in order to the biological demands placed on them in the environment. When this middle age period is getting more mature and a woman starts to move toward the perimenopause phase where she's still having menstrual cycles, they become a little bit more erratic in some way. And the reason that this happens is because the water element, which is a stabilizing force of the body, as well as the earth element, which is water and earth elements together, the stabilizing forces of the body, they are declining as a woman. We all hear like, oh, you don't develop muscle as much, after age. I think I hear it's age 30, but it's not just muscle. So there are other parts of us as well that are not as robust as we start to age in the 30s and the 40s. And as we get into the 40s and that perimenopause phase comes, with that decrease in stability from the decrease of the water and earth elements, what we find is that increase of the air elements, maybe an increase of the space elements as well. Depending on if a woman has had a child, that'll increase the space element in the body. And when that happens, when you have less stabilizing forces in the body, there's a lot more erratic things that can happen in relation to the blood in the body and the way that the blood travels and the way that energy travels through the body. So that perimenopause time can feel quite erratic for people, and depending on the kinds of doshas that they have out of balance in higher or lower amounts in the body, they'll experience that phase very differently. But it is sort of a general rule that the body's functioning becomes a little bit more erratic in those perimenopause years, and that will continue that sort of erratic behavior because perimenopause is a transition phase. Much like puberty was a transition phase for a woman, perimenopause is also that transition into menopause where the menses end and are not present anymore. And that happens due to a change in the fire element in the body as the fire element decreases as we age and we become the kind of old witchy ladies that we're all so excited to turn into so that we can cook, broths and potions in our cauldrons in our houses. It's with that increase of the vata, right, of the air element, there's a decrease of the fire element in that stage. So the bodies get colder, the skin gets thinner, less oily and juicy and things like that. So these moments of our lives, from the transitions of perimenopause and then into menopause and beyond menopause, as we age, these elements are all changing. They're all changing: the earth element, the water element, the fire element, the air element, and the space element. And the level by which our physical matter starts to, I would just say, thin out, or it's almost as if we have layers of ourselves that start to thin, and these veils that begin to thin, and we become actually more spiritual creatures as we get older because we're more connected to the space around us and those unseen elements, the connected more to the greater forces of nature. And, there's a whole separate discussion that we could have about, death and all of those things. But these life stages are very important to honor, and they're very important to know that we have to actually treat our bodies differently in all of these stages as our elements are changing. And this is even beyond, what kind of doshas you typically have out of balance. If you're a person that typically has vata out of balance when you're 25, well, as you age, you might have more of a difficult time keeping that vata in check as you age. But if you're a person that typically has, healthy vata, healthy pitta, healthy kapha, and a robust body, the aging process can actually happen a lot easier. Everything created starts as something subtle and then turns into something gross. And once it becomes gross, it again turns into something subtle again. And this is the arc of human life. We begin from a seed, perhaps even as an idea or a feeling before that, and then we turn into a full-fledged human body, only to break down again, to give all of our elements back to the earth. And these bodies are more watery and earthy when they're younger. In the middle age, the body becomes more fiery. And then in the older age, things become a little less material as the air and space elements take over. And because transformation requires fire, the middle part of life is when the woman reproduces, when she is in her active fertile years. Her transformative powers are also greatest in this phase of life. More water means more lubrication, and lubrication helps you withstand great change. So if you're going to, for example, if you're going to bear a child in those years, if you're going to push something the size of a butternut squash through an apple-sized hole, because your cervix would dilate to 10 centimeters in diameter before pushing a baby out, if that's going to happen, then you really, really, really want to make sure your tissues are juicy, lubricated, flexible, able to tolerate that sort of pressure and trauma. In the later fertile years, that water element begins to decrease, and this causes a decrease in the lubricating properties of the body and also a hormonal interruption. So your hormones travel through water. So if there's a disruption in the water element, the hormones are going to get disrupted as well. In the same way that if there's high water element and high fire elements in the body, you might have actually high levels of hormones in a body. Once a woman hits menopause and the air and the space elements begin to reduce the material nature of the body, the reproduction, and that's actually thankfully so, because can you imagine gaining 20 to 50 pounds and then the damage caused by pushing a baby out once your tissues have become less robust and pliable? There's a certain time for reproducing for sure. And all of these stages have their pros and their cons to them, and their joys and their challenges and their gifts. So there's not one perfect time for a woman to have a child. It really depends on her unique situation in terms of those middle fertile years, when specifically that should happen. Fortunately, most women's water and earth elements do not take a sharp decline until menopause. So women with a vata imbalance may actually find that their water element declining early, or those with the kapha imbalance may find that theirs is declining later. Women dealing with inflammatory pitta issues while trying to conceive or carry a child may find these issues exacerbated during pregnancy, even because the fire element increases dramatically during gestation. So if you understand the common tendencies that you face during certain life stages, that women face in general during certain life stages, it's very helpful. But understanding, your unique constitution is really important, and honoring each of these stages of a woman's life is very important, and not something that we do very well in our culture. Health class in high school or middle school, or whenever we have these health classes that talk to us about reproductive health, they're not really enough. We need areas of our lives that are building in rituals that celebrate the transitions of a woman's life, especially because there's so many changes that a woman goes through. There are more changes that a woman goes through than a biological male. And all transitions are better. There's a better experience during transitions when we honor that there's a transition taking place. And the idea that we need to stabilize certain aspects a little bit more during these transitions is very important. So wherever you are on your journey, probably somewhere in that middle phase, whether you're at the early stage or the later stages of your middle phase of life, that adulthood phase, the fiery phase of life, and understanding the gifts of the power and the influence of that fire element that you have, and also that intensity also coming with its challenges, and just being very grateful for all of the experiences that you're going to have in your lifetime and all the different ways that you'll be able to experience humanity. It's just wonderful. I get so excited. I get this kind of goosebump feeling when I get a booking from a new client that I haven't met yet. And I get so excited because I know that somebody has made a decision to go really, really, really deep into their healing. And because I know that Ayurveda is not a quote unquote normal thing that many people have access to, at least not in the United States where I live. So I know that when someone books with me, that they've really made a decision that they want to go deep into their healing. And so you could do that on my website at heathergrzych.com. That's Heather, GRZYCH.com. You can book me for either a Ayurvedic consultation if you're ready to dive in, or you can also book me for a 15-minute connection call if you're not sure where to go yet. I do have a couple offerings that are not on my website, and we could talk about that. So I look forward to meeting you. Thank you for tuning in and dropping in with us today. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. I really want to hear your feedback. To learn more about my work, visit heathergrzych.com. That's Heather, GRZYCH.com. And meet me here next time on The Wisdom of the Body.